Welcome to the Funeral Channel Network podcast, everyone. We're jumping into a brand new deep dive today, and I want to start by asking you, the listener, to just kind of picture a really standard medical scenario.
Okay, like an emergency room visit or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like, imagine you go in, you have a broken arm, and the doctor puts you in the X-ray machine. Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute engineered precision.
Right, it's
Right.
very black and white.
Literally. You get the X-ray, it shows that jagged white line against the dark gray background, and the doctor just points right at it and says, there it is, that's the problem.
It's totally visible, it's binary, it's easily categorized, it's either broken or it's not broken.
Exactly. But if you step into the world of acute grief and cognitive trauma, that X-ray machine is completely broken. It just does not work.
Oh yeah, the visual evidence just disappears entirely.
Right. You are suddenly staring at a glowing computer screen, maybe you're weeping, and you're trying to decide if, 12-point Arial is the right font to summarize your mother's entire existence on Earth.
Wow. Yeah, that's heavy.
It is. We are looking at a landscape of completely invisible internal tension here, because you are tasked with this agonizingly high-stakes project.
Creating a tribute for a loved one.
Right, a loved one who has just passed away. And the only tools you have to accomplish this deeply, deeply emotional task are the cold, rigid, mathematical rules of page margins, font sizes, and, image cropping.
Which is just a brutal combination.
It really is. So today, for this deep dive, we are exploring the collision between profound emotional weight and utilitarian design.
Yeah, we're basically examining user experience under the most extreme psychological duress imaginable.
Exactly. And our framework for this deep dive is this really comprehensive guide. It's titled From Blank Page to Beautiful Program in Minutes.
Which is a bold promise, honestly.
It is, yeah. But it specifically details the mechanics and the underlying philosophy of a resource called the Funeral Program Site.
Right. And what we're really unpacking today is how pre-designed frameworks, which, on the surface, they might just seem like simple aesthetic shortcuts.
Like cheating on your homework or something.
Exactly, like downloading a quick flyer template. But we're looking at how they actually function as critical psychological interventions.
Yes.
They step in to provide structure when a person's internal structure has just completely collapsed.
Which is such a vital distinction, because I want you to imagine you are the person tasked with this, right? Your phone is ringing every 10 minutes with relatives asking for hotel details.
All the logistics are a nightmare.
Right. Where do I park? What time is the wake? And you haven't slept in 3 days. And on top of all of that, you are physically fighting with a word processor because the photograph you just inserted completely deleted the second page of your document.
We have all been there with the formatting.
Yeah.
But in this state, it's just devastating.
Completely. So understanding how functional design solves this specific, terrifying problem, it isn't just about learning how to make a nice brochure.
No, not at all.
It's a masterclass in how design provides actual, measurable cognitive relief. So, let's just start with the very first hurdle this guide identifies, which is the absolute paralysis of the blank page.
A blank page. It's a universal symbol of intimidation across literally all creative fields, right?
Oh, yeah. Writers talk about it all the time. Writer's block.
Right, writer's block. But in this context, the stakes are altered entirely. It's not just, I don't know what to write for my novel.
Yeah, the deadline is a bit more strict than a novel.
Way more strict. When you open a new document, that glowing white rectangle represents a total vacuum of constraints. It is an infinite matrix of decisions that you now have to make.
What do you mean by an infinite matrix? Just too many options?
Exactly. You have to establish the spatial layout, you have to select the typography, you have to balance the color palette, and then you actually have to generate the written content on top of it all.
Which, okay, for a person operating at normal capacity, that's just a standard design challenge.
Sure. A graphic designer does that before lunch.
Right. But for a person in mourning, it is neurologically impossible.
It literally is.
Yeah.
And I think we should actually dig into that neurological impossibility, because on the surface, someone might listen to this and say, well, come on, you're just picking a font and typing some words. Why is that so hard?
Right, just pick Times New Roman, get it over with.
Exactly. But there's a massive physiological shift happening in the brain during acute grief. And it fundamentally destroys a person's ability to make those choices.
Okay, break that down for me. What is actually happening in the brain when someone is sitting at that computer crying over the blank page?
So the mechanism at play here is essentially a hijacking of the brain's resource allocation.
Hijacking.
Yeah. When you experience the acute trauma of losing a loved one, your brain's threat detection center, which is the amygdala, goes into complete overdrive.
Okay, so the amygdala is like the fire alarm.
Yes, the fire alarm is blaring. It is flooding your system with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. It's putting you in a pure survival state.
Even though there's no physical danger, you're just sitting at a desk.
Right, but the brain doesn't know the difference between a physical threat and a massive emotional trauma. It just knows it's under attack.
Wow.
So because the brain is dedicating all its energy to processing this overwhelming emotional survival state, it pulls resources away from the prefrontal cortex.
And the prefrontal cortex is like the executive office of the brain, right?
Exactly. It's the part that handles complex planning, organizing, impulse control, and crucially for this scenario, multi-step problem solving.
So the part of your brain that you need to use Microsoft Word is basically unplugged.
Unplugged, starved of resources, severely suppressed, whatever you want to call it.
That is wild.
So when you stare at a blank digital canvas in that state, you aren't just looking at empty space, you're looking at a demand for micro decisions.
Micro decisions, like, well,
Like what size should the header be? Should the text be left aligned or justified? How much negative space is required between the obituary and the order of service?
oh man, even just hearing you list those out is stressful.
Right. Because each of those questions requires the prefrontal cortex to analyze variables, project outcomes, and then actually execute a choice.
And if the prefrontal cortex is offline because the amygdala is hoarding all the energy,
Then forcing a grieving person to make these micro decisions creates a massive cognitive roadblock. It physically feels insurmountable.
it's like decision fatigue, but compressed into an absolute pressure cooker.
Yes, pressure cooker is the perfect way to describe it.
Like, I've heard decision fatigue described in retail, you know?
Like at the grocery store.
Yeah, exactly. Like when you go to buy toothpaste, and there are, 90 different kinds. There's tartar control, whitening, baking soda, gel, paste.
And eventually your brain just gives up.
Right. You just grab whatever is in a blue box and you walk away because you just can't process it anymore.
But the difference here is the stakes.
Exactly. Because here, the clock is relentlessly ticking. The funeral is in 3 days. Guests are actively booking flights.
You don't have the luxury of walking away from the toothpaste aisle.
No. You have to finalize this document so it can go to the printer today. You can't just throw your hands up and say, I'll do it next week.
And that ticking clock is the catalyst for the psychological friction we see here. Time is the one resource that absolutely does not exist during funeral planning.
It really doesn't. Everything is moving so fast.
And the infinite possibilities of a blank page, they require time. They require time to experiment, to iterate, to try a font, realize you hate it, and try another one.
Which you do not have.
Which you do not have. So, by utilizing professional templates, the user is given a necessary constraint.
A constraint.
Yeah. And in design psychology, constraints are not restrictive. They are actually liberating.
That feels a little counterintuitive. We usually think of constraints as a bad thing, right? Like being boxed in.
Usually, yes. But here, the template eliminates the infinite matrix. It makes the architectural decisions for you, which gives that exhausted prefrontal cortex a resting place.
Oh, I see. It's like someone else already built the box, so you don't have to figure out how to use a hammer.
Exactly. It separates the mechanical, mathematical task of formatting from the deeply human task of memorializing. You can focus on the memories because you don't have to focus on the margins.
I love that. Focusing on the memories instead of the margins. But, okay, I want to push back on the root cause of this intimidation for a second.
Okay, go for it.
Is the blank page paralyzing purely because the amygdala is hijacking the brain and suppressing executive function?
That's a huge part of it.
Right. But is it also fundamentally because people without a background in graphic design simply don't know what makes a document look professional? Because honestly, even on my best day, if I'm completely rested, fully caffeinated, and perfectly happy, if you asked me to design a polished, elegant brochure from scratch.
Without a template.
Yeah, without a template, I would probably end up with something that looks like a high school book report from 1998. It would be terrible.
Clip art and word art everywhere.
Exactly. Neon gradients, it would be a disaster.
Well, that is a critical distinction you're making, and the reality is that it's a compounding of both factors.
So it's both.
Yes. You have this severe neurological impairment of grief layered directly on top of a foundational lack of technical skill.
That is a brutal combination.
It really is. The guide we are analyzing points this out explicitly. Achieving a high level of quality from scratch is incredibly frustrating for non-designers.
But that raises a deeper question, I think.
Which is?
Why does it need to look professional in the first place?
That's a great question.
I mean, why can't a grooving family just type the facts? You know, the person's name, their dates, the time of the service, just print it on standard white copy paper, staple it, and hand it out.
Right. Why the pressure for perfection?
Exactly. Why the immense pressure to make it beautiful? It's not like the guests are going to critique the graphic design of a funeral program, are they?
You'd hope not. But the desire for a professional aesthetic actually has nothing to do with vanity. It's not about showing off to the attendees.
Okay, then what is it about?
It is intimately tied to the profound dual nature of the document itself. A funeral program is not a singular object.
What do you mean by that? It's literally one piece of folded paper.
Physically, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But functionally, it is operating on two entirely different timelines simultaneously. It is serving two vastly different sociological functions.
Okay, this duality, this is arguably the most fascinating part of the entire framework we're looking at today.
It really reframes the whole process.
It really does. It has a present tense utility and a future tense value.
Yes.
Let's break those down because this is crucial. Let's start with the present tense. During the actual memorial, this document is a functional guide.
Right. It provides the structure for the service. So think about the sociological environment of a memorial service. Just picture the room.
Okay.
You have a room full of people experiencing varying degrees of sorrow.
Some are sobbing, some are just quiet.
Right. And many of them are strangers to one another. You've got colleagues, distant relative, childhood friends who haven't seen each other in 30 years.
It's a really mixed crowd.
Very mixed.
Yeah.
And they are all emotionally raw. They're often disoriented, and they're stepping into an unfamiliar space, maybe a church they've never been to, or a funeral home.
Right.
In that environment, the program acts as a behavioral script.
A behavioral script. I like that.
It grounds the room. It guides this disparate group of people through a shared ritual.
Because without it, nobody knows what they're supposed to be doing.
Exactly. It tells them when to stand up. It tells them when to sit and listen. It tells them what hymn is being sung and who is speaking next.
It's the sheet music for the day.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yes. It synchronizes the room because if you don't have that synchronization, you have a chaotic environment. You have people fumbling around, whispering to the person next to them like, wait, what's happening now? Who is this guy at the podium?
Are we supposed to be kneeling right now?
Right. And that confusion completely disrupts the collective grieving process. So for the service to run smoothly, that document needs to be exceptionally clear.
Highly logical.
And highly functional.
And that is the utilitarian burden of the design. The typography must be legible, the hierarchy of information has to be completely obvious, and the flow of the event must be unambiguous.
But the crazy thing is, the moment the service concludes, that present tense functional utility entirely evaporates.
Right, gone.
Gone. The document no longer needs to tell anyone when to sing. The singing is over.
Right.
And this is where the timeline shifts to the future tense.
This shift is where the real pressure comes in.
It transforms from a functional map into an artifact.
A
keepsake. And this is where the pressure to make it perfect becomes almost crushing for the family, because physical objects hold memory in a way that digital files just don't.
They really don't. You don't frame a PDF.
No. People take these printed programs home, they tuck them inside family Bibles, they pin them to cork boards in their kitchens.
They place them in cedar memory boxes in the attic.
Right. You are crafting a legacy document. Someone is going to physically hold this piece of paper in their hands a decade from now.
And the psychology of the physical artifact is just vital here. Because in a highly digitized world, tactile objects carry immense emotional weight.
They become anchors.
Exactly. And the user, the grieving family member who is sitting at the computer designing this, they know intuitively that this piece of paper will become a surrogate for the person they lost.
Wow, a surrogate. That is a heavy thought.
It is, but it explains the anxiety. Therefore, a poorly formatted, messy, or amateurish document feels like a deep personal disrespect to the deceased.
Like you didn't care enough to make it look nice.
Exactly. The user's internal monologue is demanding perfection, because the profound love they feel for the person demands it. They need the physical object to reflect the beauty of the life lived.
So, okay, let's look at what we've stacked up here. You have this immense existential pressure to create a flawless, beautiful heirloom,
Check.
combined with the immediate utilitarian need to create a functional, clear schedule for a room full of disoriented strangers.
Check.
All while your brain is physically incapable of making executive decisions because of the cortisol flooding your system.
It is a perfect storm of cognitive overload.
So where does a family even begin to structure that information? Like, what goes where?
Well, this is exactly where the abstract emotional pressure meets the concrete architecture of design.
The architecture.
Yes,
Yeah.
because without a framework, families face absolute spatial chaos.
Spatial chaos on the page.
Right. Imagine you paste a 500-word obituary into a blank Word document. Suddenly, it takes up a page and a half.
Right, and it pushes the entire order of service off the page entirely.
Yeah. Exactly. And then you try to add a photograph, and it's just floating aimlessly in the margin. The eye has absolutely nowhere to rest.
It's a complete collapse of visual hierarchy.
Yes, a total collapse. And professional templates solve this by providing an invisible scaffolding.
Scaffolding, I like that.
When the guide from the funeral program site discusses clear and organized layouts,
Yeah.
it is actually talking about the mathematical division of space.
The math of the page.
Exactly. A good layout dictates the reading gravity.
Reading gravity, what is that?
It's the way a human eye naturally scans a page. In Western cultures, it's usually in a Z pattern or an F pattern.
Oh, like reading left to right, top to bottom.
Right. The template places the most vital information, which is typically the photograph and the person's name, precisely where the eye lands first.
Top left or dead center.
Exactly. And then it allocates balanced, constrained zones for the really dense text of the obituary, ensuring it doesn't overwhelm the page.
So it essentially hands the user a fully framed house. It says, look, the structural integrity is guaranteed, the walls are load-bearing, you don't have to worry about the roof caving in, all you have to do is paint the living room.
Yes. It removes the engineering aspect entirely.
And a really critical component of that engineering, from what I understand, is the use of negative space. Or white space, right?
Oh, absolutely. Native space is huge.
Because amateurs tend to view empty space on a page as a mistake. Like it's something that must be filled up immediately.
Right. They think, oh, there's a blank corner here. I better add a floral graphic or a poem.
And that results in these incredibly cluttered, suffocating designs.
Right. Whereas professional templates purposefully engineer negative space. They do it to give the text room to breathe.
And what does that do for the reader?
It subconsciously lowers the cognitive load for the person reading it. It creates a sense of calm and order, which, as we established, is exactly what that chaotic room of mourners needs.
Okay, so the architecture of the page is crucial. The scaffolding, the negative space. But that's only half the battle, isn't it?
Unfortunately, yes.
Because even if you have the perfect layout with brilliant negative space and a flawless Z-pattern reading gravity, there is a hidden trap that can completely ruin the document,
Oh, yeah.
especially for its present tense utility. And that trap is typography.
Typography.
Right.
It is an entire discipline of its own, and it is notoriously treacherous for non-designers.
Because there are thousands of fonts.
Tens of thousands.
Yeah.
And the guide we're looking at explicitly highlights the relief of using pre-selected font combinations.
Which feels like such a minor detail until you really think about it.
It's not minor at all. This is not just about picking a font that looks quote-unquote pretty.
Right.
It is about the complex interplay of legibility, readability, and aesthetic tone.
Let's actually unpack the anatomy of that. Because I think most people assume you just highlight the text, click a drop-down menu in Word, scroll for 5 seconds, and pick something that looks fancy.
Right, like an old English script or something.
Exactly. But if you do that, and then you have an older relative sitting in the back pew of a dimly lit church, the anatomical structure of that font is literally the difference between them following along with the service or just giving up entirely.
It really is. So let's look at the mechanics of legibility. You have to consider elements like the X height.
Okay, stop right there. What is an X height?
So the X height is literally the distance between the baseline, the invisible line the letters sit on, and the top of the lowercase letters, like a lowercase x.
Okay, so how tall the little letters are compared to the capital letters.
Exactly. And fonts with larger X heights are significantly easier for older eyes to read.
That makes sense. They're just visibly bigger without taking up more horizontal space.
Right. But then you also have to consider the environment where this is being read.
The church or the funeral home.
Right. And a church or a memorial hall is very often characterized by low contrast lighting.
Right, you've got stained glass windows, maybe some dim chandeliers. It's usually not fluorescent office lighting.
Exactly. So if
Yeah.
you pick a delicate, spindly script font,
Mm.
the ones with a really thin, sweeping loop,
Yeah, the ones that look like formal wedding invitations.
right, that might look exquisitely elegant on a bright, high-definition backlit computer screen.
Because your monitor is literally shooting light into your eyes.
Exactly. But when you print that same spindly font on matte paper, and someone tries to read it in dim stained glass lighting,
The thin strokes probably just disappear.
they completely vanish,
Hmm.
the letters break apart, it
Yeah.
becomes an illegible gray blur.
Oh, wow. I never even thought about how the paper and the lighting interact with the font weight.
It's critical. So
Mhm.
for the heavy reading, the dense paragraphs of the obituary, or the really specific line-by-line details of the order of service, you need a highly functional, highly legible font, usually a serif or a clean sans serif.
Okay, but here's the problem. If you use that same utilitarian, highly readable font for the person's name on the cover, it feels cold, doesn't it?
Very cold.
Like, if I put my grandmother's name in bold Arial on the cover of her funeral program, it feels like a corporate memo.
Or a tax return.
Exactly. It doesn't feel like a loving tribute. And this is exactly why font pairing is necessary, but it's also why it's so incredibly difficult to do well.
Right, because font pairing requires balancing contrast with harmony.
Contrast and harmony.
Yeah. You need a display font, perhaps a flowing script or a really dignified traditional serif for the headers and the name on the cover. That establishes the emotional tone.
The warmth, the elegance.
Yes. But then you need a workhorse font, a clean, readable, straightforward sans serif for the body text.
You know, I always think of font pairing like mixing audio frequencies in music production.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it. Tell me more.
Well, if you take two heavy, complex script fonts and put them next to each other on a page, it's kind of like having two bass guitars playing different songs at the exact same time.
That sounds awful.
Right. The frequencies clash, the sound gets muddy, and it literally causes sensory fatigue. You can't distinguish the notes.
Right, the eye gets exhausted trying to decipher it.
Exactly. So you need a crisp treble, a clean, simple, quiet font to cut through the noise and balance out the heavy bass of the script font.
That is a brilliant analogy. The contrast is exactly what prevents visual fatigue. You need the treble and the bass.
But the thing is, expecting a grieving person to intuitively understand the audio mixing of typography.
It's absurd.
It's totally absurd.
Yeah.
Expecting them to know the difference between kerning and tracking or serif versus sans serif legibility, you might as well ask them to rebuild a transmission.
Exactly. And that is why pre-selected font combinations in these templates eliminate this technical trap. The decisions have already been mathematically and aesthetically optimized by a professional.
So the user just highlights the placeholder text, types their loved one's name, and the template ensures the frequencies are perfectly balanced.
Right. The display font is elegant, the body font is readable, and they don't have to spend 3 hours second-guessing it.
But wait, I do have a question about this. Because if all of these variables are locked in,
Okay.
if the spatial layout is predetermined, the negative space is calculated, and the fonts are pre-paired, doesn't the document run the risk of becoming generic?
The uniqueness question.
Right, because if hundreds of other families are downloading the exact same template from the funeral program site, doesn't it strip away the uniqueness of the individual they are trying to honor? It feels like it could turn into a cookie-cutter memorial.
That is the paradox of templated design, for sure. But it's one that is easily resolved when you understand where the actual emotional resonance of a document lives.
Where does it live?
Well, the structure must be standardized so that it is functional and legible. We've established that.
Right, the sheet music has to have lines and notes.
Exactly. But the uniqueness does not come from reinventing the margins. It doesn't come from discovering a brand new font.
Okay, then where does it come from?
It comes entirely from the content that the user injects into that structure.
The personal details.
Yes, the framework is meant to be invisible. You want the picture frame to disappear so that the painting commands all the attention.
That makes total sense. You don't want people looking at the program and saying, wow, look at this incredible negative space. You want them looking at the person.
Exactly. And in a memorial program, the most powerful element of that painting, the absolute core of the personalization, is the visual record.
The photograph.
The photographs.
And this brings us to what is simultaneously the most sacred and the absolute most infuriating part of the entire process, adding those photos.
Oh, the digital friction here is just off the charts.
It really is, because think about the emotional journey of gathering those photos. You are sifting through shoeboxes of old Polaroids.
All in the old paper.
Yeah. Or you're scrolling through thousands of images on your phone, trying to find that one specific smile from a family vacation 5 years ago.
It's deeply emotional.
Yeah.
It's a journey through a person's entire life.
It is. But the second you try to put that photo into the digital document, that beautiful emotional journey slams face first into a brick wall of technical friction.
The digital friction of image processing is a massive, massive hurdle.
Because when you attempt to insert an image into a blank word processing document, you are immediately forced to engage with the underlying math of the software's rendering engine.
Yes. You have to deal with aspect ratios.
Okay, remind me, what is the aspect ratio?
It's the proportional relationship between the width and the height of the image. So if you have a wide landscape photo and you try to cram it into a tall portrait box...
Oh, right. It gets squished.
Exactly.
Okay.
And on top of aspect ratios, you have to wrestle with text wrapping algorithms.
Oh my gosh, the text wrapping algorithms are the absolute worst.
They're the bane of every office worker's existence.
Anyone who has used standard software knows this nightmare. You drop a JPEG into the file, and the software just panics and defaults to some arbitrary rule like inline with text.
Right.
And suddenly, your perfectly formatted obituary is just shattered. Half the paragraph jumps to the next page. A single word is marooned at the very bottom of the screen.
And the photo itself is either the size of a postage stamp,
Yeah.
or it's so massive it's bleeding off the edge of the screen.
Yes. And then you try to fix it. Right. You try to click and drag the corner of the photo to resize it.
And you accidentally grab the side instead of the corner.
Exactly. And the image stretches horizontally. And suddenly you've distorted the person's face into a funhouse mirror.
Which is just awful when it's a picture of a deceased loved one.
It's a profound cognitive dissonance. You are trying to engage in this deeply human, sacred act of honoring a memory.
Right.
And the software basically forces you to become an amateur layout engineer.
You are thrust out of your emotional mourning process and thrown into a frustrating battle with pixel dimensions and bounding boxes.
It completely replaces the warmth of remembering with the cold irritation of troubleshooting.
And again, we have to go back to the constraint of time.
Right, the ticking clock.
You do not have 3 hours to go to YouTube and watch tutorials on how to anchor an image behind text in Microsoft Word.
You just don't.
And the guide specifically highlights how professional templates bypass this entire nightmare.
How do they do it?
Through the use of designated photo areas.
Okay, designated photo areas. What makes them so special?
They are brilliant mechanisms of user interface design. They act as pre-coded containers within the document.
Pre-coded containers?
Yes. So when a user drags a photo into one of these zones, the template's underlying code takes over all of the math we just talked about.
Oh, wow. So you don't have to manually resize it.
No. It automatically crops the image to fit the container perfectly without altering the aspect ratio. So there is zero distortion. The face never stretches.
That is amazing. What about the text wrapping?
It locks the boundaries. The container is coded so that the image cannot interfere with the surrounding text, no matter how big the original file is. The text wrapping is pre-calculated and locked in place.
It's like it creates a protective barrier around the memory.
That's a beautiful way to phrase it, yes.
You just drop the photo in, and the template handles the physics of the page.
Right.
It allows the user to stay in that emotional, reflective state, rather than snapping them back into a state of technical frustration where they want to throw their laptop out the window.
Exactly. It reclaims their time, and more importantly, it reclaims their cognitive bandwidth.
Which is already so depleted.
So depleted.
Yep.
The guide really emphasizes efficiency. And I think it's important to note that in the context of grief, efficiency is not about rushing the process to just get it over with.
Right. It's not a race.
No. It is an act of care. By removing the technical friction of cropping and aligning, the template gives the family their time back.
And what do they do at that time?
That energy can now be redirected toward the things that actually matter. Writing a truly meaningful eulogy, selecting a really poignant poem or scripture, or, honestly, simply sitting quietly with family.
Having a cup of tea instead of crying over a distorted JPEG.
Exactly. The design absorbs the mechanical burden so the human can focus on the emotional reality.
That is just so profound. So, okay, let's say the digital file is complete.
All right. It's done.
The layout is perfectly balanced, the fonts are elegantly paired and highly legible for the back pew, and the photographs are securely anchored in their designated zones without any funhouse mirror stretching.
It looks beautiful on the screen.
It looks perfect on the screen. The family breathes a huge sigh of relief, but
There's always a but.
there is a massive looming threat that DIY designers rarely anticipate.
Oh, yes. The final boss.
The final boss, the transition from the digital world of the screen to the physical reality of the printer.
This is the final, and honestly, often the most devastating stage of the user journey.
Because you think you're done. You hit print and you think that's it.
Right. But the translation from digital light, pixels on a backlit screen, to physical ink on a physical piece of paper is incredibly fraught with mechanical limitations.
And the guide explicitly warns about this, doesn't it?
It does. It warns that preparing to print from scratch often leads to absolute disaster. And it specifically cites incorrect margins that result in cut-off text.
Okay, let's explain exactly why that happens. Because a user looks at their screen, they see the words going right to the edge of the white page on Microsoft Word, and they naturally assume the printer will just spit that out exactly as it looks.
It seems like common sense.
Right. So why does the printer chop the dates off the bottom of the page or slice the last sentence of the obituary entirely in half? What is actually happening inside the machine?
It comes down to the physical mechanics of standard desktop and consumer-grade printers, like the ones you have in your home office, or even at a local copy center.
Okay.
These machines use mechanical rollers to pull the physical sheet of paper through the ink carriage.
Right. It has to feed the paper through.
Right. And because the roller has to physically grip the edge of the paper to move it, the printer literally cannot spray ink on that specific outer perimeter. If it did, it would spray ink all over its own rollers and ruin the machine.
Oh. Okay. So the machine physically needs a blank edge just to hold onto the paper.
Exactly. This creates a forced, non-printable margin. It's an invisible blank border around the edge of the page.
So if you design your document in a word processor from scratch,
Yes?
and you just push your text or your background color all the way down to the absolute edge of the digital canvas because it looks cool on the screen.
You are designing inside a space that the printer physically cannot reach.
Wow.
Exactly. When the digital file is sent to the printer, the machine just does its best. It prints what it can, and it simply stops printing where its rollers begin.
It decapitates the text.
Decapitates the perfect word. Half the letters are just gone.
That is a nightmare, especially if it's the person's birth date or death date at the bottom of the cover.
It's devastating.
Mm-hmm.
And in professional graphic design, overcoming this requires an understanding of two very technical concepts: bleeds and safe zones.
Okay, bleeds and safe zones. Give me the crash course.
So a safe zone is an invisible border that is mathematically calculated to ensure all critical text remains well inside the printable area of literally any machine.
So it's like a buffer, a protective buffer.
Exactly. Keep the text in the safe zone, and it will never get chopped off.
Okay, and what is a bleed? Because that sounds messy.
A bleed is an extended area of background color, or an image that intentionally runs off the edge of the page. But it's meant to be printed on a larger sheet of paper and then physically trimmed down later at a professional print shop.
Ah, with one of those big guillotine paper cutters.
Exactly. That's how professional magazines get color all the way to the edge. They print it bigger and cut it down.
And obviously, a grieving family member using an HP inkjet printer at 2 in the morning does not know what a bleed is.
No.
Nor do they have a guillotine paper trimmer in their kitchen to precisely slice the edges off 150 folded programs.
Exactly. Which is why the print-ready settings embedded in professional templates are the ultimate safety net.
How do the templates fix this?
These templates are pre-configured with aggressive, standardized safe zones. They ensure that no matter what consumer printer the file is sent to, the margins are generous enough to accommodate those mechanical rollers.
So the layout is locked safely within the printable area no matter what.
Yes. What you see on the screen is mathematically guaranteed to be what emerges from the printer. It completely eliminates the devastating surprise of pulling 100 ruined physical copies out of the printer tray.
The psychological relief of that guarantee just cannot be overstated. You press print and you know it's going to work.
You can finally go to sleep.
Exactly. But, the guide expands on this physical presentation even further. It doesn't just stop at the program itself.
Like, there's more.
It introduces the concept of a unified visual identity across multiple memorial items.
Yes, the coordinated collection.
Right. It talks about coordinating the design of the main program with prayer cards, bookmarks, maybe even large memorial posters placed at the entrance of the venue.
And the psychology of a unified presentation is deeply rooted in how human beings process environments.
Oh, this is interesting. How so?
Well, we talked earlier about how the layout of a single page uses alignment and negative space to create a subconscious sense of order and calm for the reader.
Right, the reading gravity and the white space.
That exact same principle applies to the physical environment of the memorial service itself.
The whole room.
The whole room.
Because when you walk into the vestibule of the church or the funeral home, and the large welcome poster on the easel features the exact same typographic hierarchy, the exact same color palette, and the exact same photographic treatment as the little prayer card handed to you at the door.
And the same as the program resting on your seat.
It completely changes the atmosphere.
It creates an environment of visual cohesion.
Hmm.
And from a cognitive standpoint, cohesive branding reduces sensory friction.
Reduces sensory friction. So the attendees' brains don't have to work as hard.
Exactly. The attendees don't have to process 4 different visual styles.
Right.
They aren't looking at a neon poster and then a black and white program and a floral bookmark.
They instantly recognize the thematic aesthetic.
Right. And that instant recognition lowers their cognitive load. It allows them to just settle into the emotional purpose of the event. It feels deeply intentional.
It feels like the family really cared.
It elevates the entire experience. It takes it from feeling like a frantic, last-minute collection of disparate papers and turns it into a fully realized, professionally curated tribute.
And again, doing that from scratch. Trying to manually match the fonts and colors across 4 completely different file sizes.
A total logistical nightmare.
You're going from a tiny 2-inch bookmark to a 24 by 36-inch poster. You'd have to recalculate the font sizes, the safe zones, the image resolutions.
They would take days.
But the funeral program site and similar resources solve this by offering coordinated collections. You literally just make one set of aesthetic decisions. You pick one theme.
And it cascades flawlessly across all the necessary physical objects.
All pre-formatted with the correct safe zones for printing.
It is the ultimate expression of removing cognitive burden. The user makes a single, meaningful choice about the aesthetic tone, and the framework automatically executes all the complex mathematics required to replicate that tone across every single physical touchpoint.
It is honestly incredible to step back and look at the sheer amount of invisible engineering required to support someone through this process.
It really is invisible. We take it for granted.
We do. I mean, we started this whole conversation with the absolute paralysis of the blank page, the blinking cursor that demands complex executive function from a brain that has been neurologically hijacked by acute stress, cortisol, and grief.
Right, the amygdala just shutting the whole system down.
And then we explored how the template steps in to provide immediate architectural scaffolding. It answers all the spatial questions of layout and reading gravity so the user doesn't have to.
And hands them the blueprint.
Exactly. And then we unpacked the really dense mechanics of typography, how pre-selected font pairings balance the need for high legibility in low-light environments, like for our elderly relative in the back pew, with the desire for emotional, elegant aesthetics.
Avoiding the visual fatigue of those clashing font frequencies, the bass and the treble.
Right. And then we examine the severe digital friction of formatting photographs and how designated pre-coded photo areas protect the emotional sanctity of the memory from the rigid, unforgiving mathematics of aspect ratios and text wrapping algorithms.
No distorted funhouse mirror faces.
Never. And finally, we decoded the mechanical transition from digital pixels to physical paper. We explored how print-ready settings, those aggressive safe zones, and unified visual collections ensure that the resulting physical keepsake is flawlessly executed.
It guarantees that the heirloom left behind is polished and beautiful, rather than mutilated by the mechanical rollers of a home inkjet printer at 2 in the morning.
The overarching narrative here, I think, is that moving from a blank page to a beautiful tribute does not have to be a grueling, traumatizing battle with software.
It shouldn't be a battle.
By relying on thoroughly engineered, proven frameworks, users can completely bypass the technical and spatial math. They can generate a highly functional, deeply polished artifact in a fraction of the time.
And that efficiency allows them to redirect all of their limited cognitive and emotional bandwidth back to where it truly belongs.
Which is the personal, deeply human act of honoring the life that was lived.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway for you, listening to this deep dive right now. Because even if you aren't currently facing the heartbreaking task of planning a memorial, understanding the mechanics of this guide fundamentally changes how you view the interaction between design and human psychology.
It really shifts your perspective on what design actually is.
It proves that utilitarian solutions, things as dry and technical as calculating a printable margin, locking an aspect ratio, or pre-selecting a readable sans serif font, these things can directly result in profound emotional relief.
They are mechanisms of care.
Exactly. In this context, good design is not just about aesthetics. It's not about making something look pretty. It is an act of profound empathy. It is a structural intervention that reduces suffering during one of the most fragile, agonizing moments of the human experience.
It is a brilliant testament to the power of user-centric design when it's applied to extreme psychological states.
It really is.
And, it leaves us with a highly provocative, lingering question.
Ooh, okay, lay it on me.
If a simple, mathematically sound template can successfully alleviate the severe cognitive load of acute grief by absorbing the burden of executive function,
Yeah.
what other highly emotional, high-stress life events are out there right now, forcing people into technical paralysis?
Yeah.
What other traumatic moments are desperately waiting for a thoughtful, structured design solution to step in and lift that invisible weight?
That is such a good question. Because it really makes you look at every digital system, every intake form, and every interface we interact with during a crisis in a completely different light.
Right, like hospital intake forms or insurance claims after a natural disaster.
Exactly. It makes you realize that maybe the visible binary X-ray machine isn't the only diagnostic tool we need when we're navigating the muddy, invisible waters of the human experience.
Sometimes the fix isn't medical.
Sometimes the most powerful, life-saving tool is simply a perfectly calculated margin, quietly holding everything together when the user's entire world feels like it is falling apart.
I couldn't agree more.